Hello, listeners. This is Janine
and Kristen
from Henrico Casa. You are listening to our podcast, Vigilant Voices.
Living life every day.
Hello, listeners. We hope you're doing well and enjoying the summer.
And we're so glad to have you with us today. We appreciate you being on this journey with us to know more about the challenges facing children and families to ensure that no child faces continued abuse, neglect, or trauma.
Right. It's definitely a journey of ongoing learning and growing together in order to best support the children in our lives and in our community.
Right. And I'm sure we'll never, quote unquote, arrive right on that journey because realistically, there's always something new to learn and understand.
And apply,
Yes.
right? None of the topics we chat about are really worthwhile unless we're all applying what we learned.
Exactly. And today, what we're going to talk through and learn about are some of the nuances of children's ages.
Which kind of sounds funny to say because on the surface, age seems pretty concrete.
Right. I'm 12.
right?
I'm,
yeah. We
5.
ask kids all the time, like, how old are you?
Yes. And like I was saying, they respond with the number of years since they were born, right? Which we know is just their chronological age.
Right.
But what if their developmental age is different?
Yeah, what if, right? That was the case with an elementary age child named Nathan, who we are currently serving at CASA. Nathan was born substance exposed and has really faced an uphill battle, since birth.
Well, and it really probably sounds like even before birth, like that those challenges started in utero if his mother was using.
Right, so true. Nathan's CASA advocate said it's clear that Nathan has not been taken care of properly. And this advocate describes Nathan as, quote, undersized and developmentally immature. And when we asked more about, what the advocate meant by that, we learned that Nathan is, one, really small for his age physically,
right.
But two, he struggles socially and he's just really far behind academically. And these developmental delays may be a result of his prenatal health or the neglect he's experienced since then, or even a result of the trauma he experienced while watching things like his step-parent overdose and, be taken away. Honestly, I'm not sure it really matters why at this point.
Yeah, it's probably all of the above, to be honest.
Right. But it does matter how we move forward, right, to make sure Nathan gets back on track developmentally. And that's why we're so thankful he now has a CASA advocate.
Yes. And, clearly this is a child who's in need of help.
Right.
But without CASA's intervention, he was also at risk for additional abuse and neglect since he is developmentally behind.
That's true, yeah.
One of the risk factors for child abuse and neglect is when a parent or caregiver doesn't understand or can't really comprehend the ages and stages of child development, or then also doesn't recognize when, let's say, that child's chronological age, yet their developmental stage don't really match up.
Yeah. And, I guess it could be a parent not understanding in general, or maybe doesn't understand what can be expected of this specific child at this specific stage, right?
And the reason why this is such a big and large risk factor is that the adults are expecting responses or behaviors from their child at, let's say, one level.
Sure.
But if that child is unable to meet those expectations, then that is what becomes frustrating based on their own developmental age, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. When there's that gap, we see adults get frustrated, sometimes respond in anger.
Or maybe compare to like a sibling.
Oh, that's true. Yep, that's very true. We've seen them enact a punishment that's inappropriate if you consider a developmental age, and so on, right? They want the child to, quote, act their age, but this child literally can't.
They can't do that. So this is a good then transition maybe to actually diving into what we mean when we say developmental age.
Yeah. Let's do that. Okay, so listener, a child's developmental age is the age at which they function emotionally, physically, cognitively, and socially.
And where things get really interesting is when a child's chronological age doesn't match their developmental age. And so when there's that mismatch, I think it's really easy for caregivers to have an unrealistic expectations for their child.
Right. And really, this concept of developmental age is a bit subjective and includes so many different categories of development.
And you sort of mentioned some of them, but again, it's that emotional, physical, cognitive,
Right.
and then even social development, right? With their peers or anyone else.
Yeah. And so like within their development, a child could be at different ages or stages in each of these areas, right? Like maybe a child is chronologically 10, but emotionally they're in the toddler realm and socially acting more like a teenager.
And that makes it super confusing.
Without a doubt.
Right?
Yeah.
And so in these various areas of their development, they may be at different numbers. So it's almost like as an adult, we're observing right in front of us, like conflicting information, and then we don't know how to respond fairly and appropriately. 'Cause
Right.
we're confused.
Yes. And I mean, it makes sense why we are, right? So, like an example to give us to think this through. Let's say this fictive 10-year-old that I just made up may be engaging in behaviors we'd associate with a teenager, like maybe drinking or running away. But their emotional depth is more childlike, right? So your instinct is to ground them like you would a typical teenager, but they can't emotionally withstand and kind of process that punishment. So as the adult, we have to find a different way to respond and to help teach them.
And that can be challenging because it takes extra time and effort.
Oh my gosh. And before we talk about how to respond to the challenge, maybe we can reflect on why a child might function at a different stage than like their than their chronological age.
Yeah, and there are really a lot of reasons to that. I mean, I think some are biological or genetic, but often, especially for the children that we serve at CASA, and what we see is that the answer is very much grounded in the trauma that they've experienced.
Right. A child's development is affected by everything going on around them, right? Starting with their in utero experience.
I read something the other day that was an interesting fact that the most rapid rate of growth in brain development is actually in utero.
That's really
Kind of makes
fascinating.
sense.
I mean, it does because so much is happening. And that's why so much of what happens during those 9 months, right, significantly impacts a child's development. If their biological mom is stressed, have they been exposed to substances like alcohol? Is the mom getting the nutrients she needs that the baby then needs, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, are they eating a nutritious diet? Are they being exposed to other children their age? Is an adult effectively modeling, good behaviors to aid their attachment and social development? Do they feel safe on an everyday basis, or are they operating in like that survival mode? Right. I mean, did they start school? I mean, there are so many examples,
right,
that we could go on.
It could go on, yeah, without a doubt. And clearly, listener, we're not pediatricians or therapists, Janine and I, but we can get a general sense for how these experiences impact development, right? Like if you haven't had the nutrients you need, your physical development, things like muscle tone or stamina, could be delayed, right? And if you aren't exposed to other children, your social development may stall. If your parent doesn't lead you in like age-appropriate play, your cognitive skills may suffer. One more example, like if your caregiver consistently responds to you in anger, you aren't learning those deeper like emotional responses that you need to learn.
Right. And as you're talking, I'm of course thinking of like specific children and cases that we've seen over the years.
Sure.
And so some examples that come to mind are like our older children or youth who have meltdowns that really seem like that would be something more for a toddler.
Right.
But I think what that really means is that they haven't developed that emotional bandwidth for sitting with that stress or the challenges that stress brings.
Right.
We've seen older tweens and teens, who socially, are in like a parallel play stage.
Which is like a toddler trait.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't really directly interact with their peers. And that then makes relationships and friendships tough in an already really tough time for kids, right? Middle school, high school.
Yeah, those are both good examples, and both demonstrate how the child's development, as shown by their behaviors and responses to things, wasn't matching, what would be, quote, normal for peers at the same chronological age, right?
Right. So listener, now that we are all aware that chronological age can be different from developmental age, like how do we respond?
Yeah. And like so much of life, it's just about setting the right expectations.
Always easier said than done. Like
oh my gosh, such truth in that. When our expectations are aligned with the reality of our child's development, we are less likely to get frustrated or angry.
Yeah, and I think also more likely than to respond in a way that can help build the child up.
Yes. So I guess first and foremost, I'd say we should be aware of the various ages of development. I think the technical term might be domain.
Yeah, because it's the physical, social, cognitive, and emotional domains, right, that we've kind of mentioned.
Yeah.
But you do have to sort of mentally train yourself to isolate these things from one another because they're all different.
Yeah, which again is easier said than done. I mean, I'm living this right now in my family, and it's tough. Like, a child can look like one age and act like another, and you need to be in the state of mind to be able to isolate and respond to their developmental age.
Right. And the domain that, like, let's say, right, has a different, different level. And I think while remembering that each domain of development, emotional, physical, cognitive, social, can have its own age or stage. And that is that
added
complexity because you have to respond to each differently.
Yes. And, once you've isolated a domain, ask yourself, like, how old is my child acting right now?
Right.
And respond like you would to someone who is, in fact, chronologically that
And
age.
that can be hard because you feel like if you're talking down, let's say, right?
Yeah.
But then I think you can also skill build, right, in this area that has been identified.
Yep.
Because the long-term goal is to help them develop further in that area.
Right.
It would be the same if it were math versus reading.
Yep.
Right. So in our cases, though, that we're talking about, this child's development may have stalled due to trauma.
Yes.
But they can still grow and progress from whatever point they're
definitely.
currently at because children are resilient too.
Without a doubt. Okay, so let's give an example, right?
All right, put me on the spot here. All right, thanks, Chris. All right. So, how about the 13-year-old won't do their homework without your help? So based on maybe the fact that they're 13 and that chronological age, what you really want to do is say, sit down and knock out the project because you should be able to do this.
Yes.
But at the same time, you've identified, maybe frustratingly, but you've identified that emotionally they cannot withstand stress that maybe a quote-unquote typical 13-year-old might. And then cognitively, their ability to then really analyze information has not yet clicked.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so here's our example. So you sit with them because your presence will be calming, which you could argue would be more like something you would do for a younger child.
Yeah, that's right.
But you ask them questions to prompt their thinking through the project. So it's more maybe hand-holding than you might expect to give a 13-year-old, but it might be what was needed in the moment.
Yeah, and just stepping back to do that, right, gives them what they need. That's a great example. Another example that I have is Nathan, right, from our CASA story that we started with. He is elementary aged, but not performing at that level cognitively and academically, like we said. So Nathan is currently living with a kinship care provider in the hopes that he can be reunited with his birth mother. And while he's in this stable, like calm, secure arrangement, right, his CASA is helping connect him with resources he needs to skill build in the developmental domains where he is lacking. And so he's starting at a small private school where he's going to get personalized attention. He's receiving tutoring services this summer. And he's engaging in play therapy to kind of boost his social and emotional skills.
All great things.
Definitely. I know. And I'm so hopeful that these supports and services will start to close the gap between Nathan's developmental age and his chronological age.
Yeah, I have no doubt and feel confident that they will.
Yeah.
So, listener, we hope that this episode has been helpful. Just sort of talking through these various ages can feel a bit like just a word scramble or jumble. But the key is recognizing that a child's chronological age may not always match their developmental age.
Right. So set your expectations accordingly.
Yes. And so our call to action this week will get you started on the right track. Map out the ages of your child or children, or maybe a child that you're working with or that's in your life, right? In the 4 developmental areas: social, emotional, physical, and cognitive, right? Where are they?
Yeah. And then maybe take it further to do a little research to remember what someone could typically expect from these children in those areas at the ages you identify.
And I think doing a little bit more research will help you not only set those right expectations, but also then identify areas where you can help the child in your life develop further.
I agree. Awesome. So listener, go map away. Thank you for listening to Vigilant Voices, Henrico Casa's new podcast. We have a vision for all children to live in safe, healthy homes. You can help us make that happen. Tell a friend about our podcast and find us on social media.
I believe in a better day.